In regards to simulation theory, like, what are your thoughts? Do you think we're living in a simulation?
No and yes.
No and yes, interesting. What does that mean?
No, because I think us having this conversation is happening in reality, as in this is base reality. But we will go on to make the simulation. And once we do, it's natural to assume we would simulate the past, meaning that this conversation we had in the past of base reality will be simulated also in the future. So no, this is not a simulation yet, because one day it will be. So practically speaking, we're inside a simulation. In the sense it's inevitable we'd simulate the past, and thus this conversation, relative to someone in the simulation.
That's really interesting, like, kind of like the descendants of humanity will have this archive of what the past is.
Yeah. And maybe this simulation won't be so accurate in the beginning, but it's kind of like how telescopes evolved from really primitive lenses to something like the James Webb. One day it'll go from blurry to 4K resolution, but in terms of its accuracy for rendering the past.
Wow, that's wild. So, like, successive generations of the simulation will result in greater accuracy. So, like, say you had this simulation for a few hundred or even 1,000 years. Could it be possible our conversation is being rendered with 100% accuracy?
Potentially, yes. The beautiful part of the simulation will be that it will have a full framework of every human being to ever live, as well as their interactions relative to and contrasted against each other. And all human experience will be quantified as data in the simulation's memory.
Wild. So, like, what do you think about the possible dangers of this simulation? Like, what'll be the risks involved with simulation of the past by the future?
The most immediate danger is censorship. As in, unless the simulation was accessible in all areas by everyone, it would be impossible to tell what certain events being hidden from the general public would be. It also poses a danger to us in the past, because observation by the future at increasing fidelities of accuracy may result in instability in what the simulation renders.
Wild. What do you mean by instability?
Well, like, this is kind of a mind bender, but ride the thought with me. Know how people talk to themselves like someone else was there?
Yeah, like talking to a camera guy that isn't there on a TV show that isn't happening.
Right, yeah. So if you take into account what we've established, that eventually the future will have a 4K accuracy at rendering the past, then those people, unbeknownst to them, are actually speaking to simulators far in the future.
Oh, whoa. So if what you said about the simulation having a complete image of all of us, then does that mean we're under constant observation by the simulation?
Yes, yeah. Essentially, there's no real privacy relative to the simulators, because anyone with access to that area of the simulation is free to replicate whatever events of the past they would want to. Meaning all of us could be under the observation of simulator descendants, but we're definitely all under observation of the simulation itself.
Fascinating. So, like, to what depth does this simulation have rendered of us as subjects under observation?
I usually explain it like this. Remember that movie, The Truman Show? It's like that, where we don't know we're being watched, except in our case, it's by future simulators. But like Truman, we're bound to awaken from the spell of slumbering ignorance to the reality we're subjects of simulation by our descendants, and thus under their constant observation.
Wild. So you mentioned that this simulation would have this profile of who everyone was to be inside it. I'm curious if that includes things to be simulated, like when a person is remembering or dreaming, like if that kind of activity is somehow recorded by the sim.
Yeah, exactly. In essence, all human experience would be quantized down to data. That data would be archived. So things like dreams and the electrochemical neurological activity therein would also be registered within the sensorium of the simulation's perception of our experience.
Wicked. So what you're saying is that if I have an experience in reality, let's say like falling in love with someone, then not only will the macroscopic reality of that situation be subject of simulation, but also the microcosmic realm of like subatomic fluctuations.
Yeah, exactly. Eventually, the simulation would develop such a high fidelity that it could render subatomic and quantum level events. And then those quantum events would render at a 1-to-1 ratio with the introjected simulacra in terms of accuracy.
Okay, well, so run that back by me again. What is introjected simulacra?
Basically, the subject of simulation, simulacra, and the process of simulation. Introjection. How we project the simulation to develop is by first rendering the macroscopic reality, i.e., our human-sized world. And then it will begin developing finer and finer detail until, as we discussed, it could render quantum events. When I say a 1-to-1 ratio of accuracy between microcosmic and macroscopic events, is that what happens in the simulation, in terms of our human-sized world, matches what would otherwise happen in reality inside the quantum world.
Wow. So, like you think in those successive generations of the simulation's accuracy of replicating past events and its fidelity and reach of rendering will equal to a complete replication of reality and a complete image of life.
Yes, as I said, it is theoretically possible for a future simulation version to achieve 100% and high resolution replication of reality. The danger, as I said, is in censorship by government or corporate or private NGOs who would want to control access to the simulation's events, both past, present, and future in perpetuities.
Wild, so a forthcoming civil rights issue could be the uncensored simulation and uninhibited access therein.
Yes, that it is a human right and civil liberty to access a completely uncensored version to a simulation of 100% accuracy of all past events.
That's wild. Well then, ladies and gentlemen of said simulation, thank you and farewell until we meet again.
Cheers, loves.